You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Solana, Doge, and more. Cryptocurrencies and digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity, provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments throughout the world's leading crypto derivatives markets. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of crypto derivatives. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown, the program where, of course, we break down all the action out here in the crypto market. And man, is it wild. In fact, you folks last week, as a result of our poll, spoiler alert, I guess we'll get to a little bit later, but you folks said last week was the wildest week in the history of crypto. And who am I to argue with such an elite group as our listeners out there at the end of the day? My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com. as well as from the network upon which so many of you folks are binging these days. Remember, if you're not listening to the full network, man, you're missing out, including a lot of great content. And B, if you like what you hear, you want to go above and beyond, you want to join us on the old pro side beyond the velvet rope, theoptionsinsider.com/pro, the place to go to learn more. As we learn who's joining us on the old program today, I'm pleased to welcome back our old pal, 2 weeks in a row, doubleheader, Mr. Greg Magadini, the Director of Derivatives over there at Amberdata. Mr. Greg, welcome back, sir.
Happy to be back. Great stuff happening, just like last week. I think it's an opportune moment to talk about markets.
All right, then let's get to it and talk about some markets, starting with the big dog, with a little bit of the old Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down the week that was, and indeed still is, from a Bitcoin trading and trending analysis and all sorts of fun perspectives. Bitcoin looking a little higher right now than it was this time on the show last week. Last week, 86,439. When we kicked off the show, it was threatening 90K, 89,791. Looking a little higher now, 90,723 out there. So looking a wee bit frothy. Actually looks like it hit 92,350 this morning. Appears to be our high for the recent run. The low coming last week, 87,285. So quite the little run out here on Bitcoin over the course of the past week since our show. But a lot to unpack out here. Mr. Greg, let's start there. What's catching your eye out there in the whipsaws of all things BTC, sir?
Well, I think first and foremost, one of the most interesting things is that you would think that volatility is high right now in terms of implied versus realized, but I find it actually pretty cheap. This is one of those moments where, buy vol high and sell it higher type of deal. So if we look at 7-day realized, we're around 72, but 7-day implied is about 61. And if we switch that out to 30-day, we see 30-day realized about 55, and 30-day implied is around 55 as well. So there's almost no variance risk premium. And given that we're in this sort of uncharted all-time high territory, this is a great time to buy vol because there's essentially no ceiling to price movement. And if everyone's leaning the same way, there's a good argument for sort of a sharp sell-off when that does actually come. And I think what's going on here is that, there's a big vol premium going into the election. And in post-election, vol sellers came around now that we have the event behind us. And we had the vol sellers at the same time as prices making new all-time highs, which creates a perfect opportunity to get long some vol at some very interesting market segments.
And what are your thoughts? Everyone was all excited. Oh, we're going to break 100K, sir. What are your thoughts as we kind of flirted with that range, didn't quite get there, sir?
Yeah, I mean, we've had 2 back-to-back weeks of double-digit gains in percentage terms. To me, there's no reason to not be bullish this market. This is the type of chart you don't want to sell. It's a vertical hockey stick higher. Or kind of like on a daily chart, if I'm looking at Bitcoin versus USD, getting a little bit of a flag pattern higher. I mean, to me, there's no reason to be bearish here. This is go with the trend. So 100K, I think, is in the cards. And then where do we go after 100K? I mean, do we just blow through that to like 110, 115? I mean, who knows? But you don't have to buy Bitcoin, but definitely don't sell it here is what I would say.
Let's see what things are saying over here, Greg, with a little platform you might be familiar with called Amberdata. Let's kick it off here, listeners, on the vol front. And we're moving enough to keep vol a little bit frothy, a little bit spicy, not blowing the doors off, but not quite back in the summer doldrums level either. A 7-day vol, so the weekly vol, 58.2 on the show last week, 61.5 this week. Coming in on the 30-day front, 54.5. Last week on the show, 56.5, so ticking up exactly 2 points there. And going out all the way 6 months, listeners, 53.25 on the show last week, 55.8, so firming up a wee bit. I think it's fair to say, Mr. Greg, we are moving around enough right now to merit these current vol levels, if not maybe a little higher, sir. What do you think?
Yep, I think this is perfectly justified in terms of where the vol levels are. I think, again, in my mind, this implies a little bit on the cheap side here.
Let's get out to the skew, listeners, and see what that's telling us. Maybe any insights, any predictions here from the skew. Let's find out, listeners. And start off on the weekly skew. And on our show last week, we were looking pretty frothy to the upside, 3.66. Close to that same level again, 3.3, coming in ever so slightly. On the 30-day, so the monthly skew, we were positive about 3 1/3 on the show last week. Giving up a point of that now, about 2.3. Maybe the fact that we were tilting with those, getting into those mid 90K range, then kind of came off it again. Maybe that took a little bit of the bloom off the rose there. Going out 6 months, though, the hodlers, they're going to hodl, listeners, and they're bidding it up nearly 3 points worth of premium to the upside last week, 2.85 to be precise. That is now 3 3/4 points. So nearly a full point worth of additional juice to the upside going out 6 months. Mr. Greg, anything catching your eye in Bitcoin skew this week?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really interesting, and this is more of like a relative vol thing, but we see where Bitcoin skew is, and that's kind of interesting. It's kind of in the upper range of, say, the past 12 months. That makes sense, perfectly reasonable as we're breaking all-time highs. One of the things that's interesting to me, though, is where is another asset trading similar skew? So I really like to look at comparable assets, in this case, like Ethereum or MicroStrategy, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But that's how I like to contextualize the relative skew. And if I compare Bitcoin skew versus those skews, Bitcoin skew kind of looks cheap to me as well. It's in a relatively high range over the past 12 months, but comparatively speaking, not unjustified at all. And again, there's plenty of reason to think that we get to this 100K level that everyone's eyeing. Again, the chart has a lot of momentum behind it. And so I would expect volatility to come to the upside, not the downside. And that's really what skew's telling me is what is the path of volatility? Is it higher prices or lower prices? And unlike the S&P 500, which typically has lower vol as prices go up, Bitcoin in this case, today, I fully expect volatility to go up as prices break higher.
Speaking of going up, the assets in Bitcoin are going up, listeners. Interesting nugget came in right after our show last week. So didn't have time to talk about on the show last week, Greg. But an interesting stat out of BlackRock. You know, they might know a thing or two about fund flows over there. And they're saying their assets in their Bitcoin ETF, at least as of last week, I'll have to run the numbers again to see if that is still the case right now. But they had surpassed those of the firm's gold fund. So everyone's always talking about gold and Bitcoin being potentially a digital gold. Well, here is a tangible example of the assets in the digital asset, Mr. Greg, surpassing the gold fund over there. What do you think, sir?
I mean, I think this is a really strong backdrop story to sort of the Bitcoin demand. The Bitcoin ETF has been one of the, I think is actually the best performing ETF ever in history in terms of total inflows by record time. And so to me, this really shows true demand from institutional players, not just people who, moved from Coinbase to buy, stole their Bitcoin on Coinbase just to buy it in iBit to use as collateral for the rest of their trading. No, this is really true new demand from a new segment of the market. And so not only do the flows tell us that story, but the prices are bearing that out as well. So again, we want to have that type of confirmation. And this is just confirming that the bullishness in Bitcoin right now is concrete. It's solid. There's real players behind that.
Get to some real products out here, shall we, listeners, that you folks like to sling your options on to get a little crypto action in your portfolio. Bitto looking a little bit firmer now than it was a week ago. It was 24 and a quarter when we kicked off the show, taking up another quarter since then, up to 24 and a half, up a point and a quarter on the week. So Bitto continuing its upside move, looking pretty frothy out there as well. ADV is 209,000 contracts a day. That's up another 41,000 from what it was this time a week ago. And we saw some explosive days. We were putting up VIX numbers out here in Bitto over the course of the last week. Another data point that I was looking at when people are saying this is potentially the craziest, wildest period in crypto history, with products like Bitto threatening 1 million contracts and things like that. Pretty wild times out there. Today, looking pretty frothy, but again, not quite as explosive as last week. 91,000 contracts. That's still a lot of paper, but not quite the hundreds upon hundreds of thousands we were seeing this time a week ago. The vol actually coming in a little bit of 61, down about 4 points out there on the week. And the big dog position out there, still the Jan 30s, looking a lot closer, a lot better than they did this time even a week ago out here. So intriguing things out here on the Bitcoin, or I should say the Bitto options front. Mr. Greg, what's catching your eye out there, sir?
Yeah, so Bitto, I think, we've talked about this multiple times. Just basically be careful with that instrument. Remember, there's going to be a futures contango. Actually, let me pull that up real quick just to see where that's trading at on CME, because it's really interesting to understand, or it's important to know what that drag is going to be. And then something else to keep in mind is you're going to get that dividend every first of the month. So to me, one of the things that's really interesting is sort of the long-dated optionality in Bitto. Can be, if you're selling covered calls or some sort of strategy, I'd rather sell calls on Bitto than I would any sort of Bitcoin asset if I was going to do that. So if we're looking at sort of the CME basis, right now the basis on CME is about 10% annualized if I'm looking at the front month contracts. And so just remember, there's going to be sort of that grind lower in terms of funding costs. So if Bitto right now is about $25 or whatever, $24.40. So just remember, every year there's $2.40 of contango coming out of that product, plus about $1 dividends per month. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be a flattening effect to the path higher in terms of prices, regardless of what Bitcoin performs.
And Mr. Greg, we have you to blame for introducing our listeners to the madness that is MSTU. I think I called it a product for crypto degenerates last week, and I stand by that, Mr. Greg. It is a wild product. This is, of course, because if MicroStrategy, if there wasn't enough madness out there for you listeners, if you woke up this morning and said, you know what, I need a 2x long MicroStrategy daily target ETF in my life, then maybe MSTU is your huckleberry. If you woke up and did that, listeners, you're looking pretty good right now. MSTU 159.65, up 23 handles on the week, or nearly 19, almost 20% just on the week. So this one's been on a wild ride. The ADV is 5,100 contracts, up another 1,400. So spoiler alert, people are starting to look at options for this wildly levered name out here. Let's just look really quickly and see what's the hot trade in MSTU. It looks like it's the DEES 250s. What? We're at 157 right now. The 250s, they traded $23.20 today, listeners, through the offer. There's a dime wide market for the 250s. Something is strange out here, Mr. Greg. I'll have to go dig into these. But Greg, it's your fault. You have unleashed MSTU on the masses, sir. What do you have to say for yourself?
Yes, MSTU is the #1 degen product that retail can get their hands on. What a product. I mean, if we're talking about those 250 calls, so this time last week, the highest call on the ladder was $135. We traded through all of those strikes. So then they had to launch new series of strikes. So now we've gone from 135 to then 185, and this week 250. And that 250 call is trading 255 vol. So, I mean, talk about a product that moves. So that's very interesting. Again, MSTR, which is sort of the underlying reference product, there's a lot of interesting wrinkles there as well. So just keep in mind these types of products, the 2x performance that rebalances on a daily basis, you're going to get that decay factor. If something drops 50%, it has to rally 100% to get back to even. While you take a high vol asset, the drops from the higher denominator happen more deeply. And so that decay is going to be faster. So that's why you can see something like MSTU, the 30-day options, 32 days, $25 puts are trading 50 cents, 317 vol. And really what that's pricing in is that, people know if there's any sort of pullback, there's going to be sort of that decaying factor. I don't know if 30 days is enough time, but it's just keep in mind that's how these products work. So something interesting there as well.
I'm just stunned. Not only did the 250s trade today, Greg, but the market was a dime wide, 23.10, 23.20 when these went up, and they traded through the offer 263 times. So, wow, wild times we are all living. So I would have said that's insane, Greg, but then again, it moved 23 handles today, pretty much. So, yeah, this thing, I guess, could be at 250 by the end of the week at this rate, Greg. So, and then beyond it to make these calls, I suppose, make some sense. You like these, listeners? MSTU DEES 250s for $23.20. Good times out here. This makes Mara seem positively quaint and normal by comparison, listeners. Mara, right around an $18, about an $18.10 when we kicked off the show. Giving up the ghost aggressively, down over 7 handles, about 7.15 handles, just over the course of the last week. Man, it seemed like we were roaring towards that 30 handle. Mara's been very range-bound over the past year, bounces off 15 to the downside, bounces, tries to get to 30, usually fails, gets close to it. Did it again last week, got up to 25 and change, and now right back down. Whoever's sitting on that pile of, there are now 52,000 of the Jan 30s open and almost 41,000 of the DEES 30s. They both had smiles on their faces last week. Probably not so much this week, but it's just been a wild ride to watch it, and it seems like right back down again. So Mara giveth and Mara taketh away, taking it away this week. Putting up some numbers, though. The ADV is 377,000. This thing roaring back to life. It was down a fraction of that not too long ago. That's up another 64,000 contracts just over the past week. Today, putting up nearly 500,000 already, 471,000 contracts on the tape. So again, we are talking about VIX numbers out here, listeners. The vol 114 down about 14 points. Still frothy, still a 114. Let's look really quickly and see what folks are up to out here in Mara today. It's 15,000 of the Nove 21 calls, followed by 14,000 of the Nove 22s, and about 13,000 of the Dice 23s out here. So a wide range of stuff going up out here. And also 1,500 of the Nove 18 puts expiring this week on the 22nd. Those went up for $1.01 this week, paper buying those. You like those, listeners? I guess if you believe it can fall another dollar and change, you're probably a fan of those. It's just wild paper out here. Mr. Greg, what's catching your eye in just an explosion of volume? Again, another data point feeding back into, is this the wildest period in crypto history? Mara putting up nearly 500,000 contracts again today, sir.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mara's got this fully backwardated term structure. We're looking at 130 vol for the short dated stuff. And then the long dated stuff is trading, 99 vol for the 1 year out. This is almost 2x Bitcoin vol. But if you look at the Mara chart long term, you kind of have this range bound asset. Whereas, if I go back to say 2022, January 2022, Mara was about $25, and today it's about $25. So you have that back and forth mean reversion vol in a product like Mara. Whereas something like Bitcoin, you kind of have that trending price higher. So again, this is to me one of those interesting assets. Can you do something there? Is there some sort of relative vol trade to be done between Mara and Bitcoin? I would kind of like to think about it like that. One of the big catalysts for Mara is, we're going to see how the administration makes Bitcoin mining here in the US more friendly. Is there, tax-free mining income for Bitcoin miners, things like that? That can be a vol event. So there's some stuff to watch around there in terms of vol events. But if I had to put a trade on Mara, I would basically sell Mara vol to finance buying Bitcoin vol, is how I think about it.
The crypto version of dispersion, sir. But yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense, obviously, when Mara, is it worth nearly a 2x vol premium? Might be a good question for you folks out there, listeners. Quite the hefty bit of premium out there, but there's always premium, there's always wild things flying fast and furious as we head on into the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we break down everything outside of the big dog, which is Bitcoin, except for right now here when we talk about the top 10. Obviously hard to escape Bitcoin in that conversation. And man, it's just been a slugfest. It is a war out here for market cap out here these days, listeners. Last week, all you Shiba Lambo fans were rejoicing. We had Shiba at number 10, right around 16.25 billion worth of market cap. This week cost you 17.6 billion. So the rising tide continues to lift all boats out there. And this week, we're kicking Shiba to the curb. It's Tron coming in at number 10, which wasn't even on our list last week. So again, just a wild time out here, especially in the bottom half of the top 10, listeners. Just body blows being slung left and right out here. Number 10, Tron, 17.6 billion worth of market cap. Number 9, it's Cardano, 25.6. Cardano was number 9 last week as well, but it's gained about 4.5 billion worth of market cap over the intervening week. So good run for Cardano, number 9. Number 8, USD coin, 37.2 billion. Number 7 is Doge, 53, almost 54 billion. Doge, now apparently the name of a government office, the Department of Government Efficiency. Ah, yes, with 2 people running it because that's efficient. Number 6, XRP, listeners, 62.75 billion worth of market cap. Number 5, it's BNB, 87, almost 88 billion. Number 4, it's Solana. Man, this one's been on a tear of late. 112.112 billion worth of market cap, listeners. Number 3, it's Tether, 127.6 billion. Number 2, it's ETH, 376, almost 377. And the big dog, man, closing in on 2 trillion, a little bit north of 1.75 trillion worth of market cap. It is, of course, good old BTC. Greg, anything catching your eye, sir, as we're seeing just a lot of evolution here in the top 10 yet again, sir?
Yeah, I think the main story that I've been seeing on Twitter and that a lot of vol traders have probably been focused on is just the underperformance of Ethereum and sort of the relatively strong performance in Solana. So Solana, for example, in the past week is up 8.4%, whereas Ethereum is down 5.7%. I mean, for Ethereum to be down on the most explosive crypto bull run in a while is just not a good sign for Ethereum. And I mentioned this last week, but I just want to highlight it again for listeners. The fundamental story that's really hurting Ethereum is essentially that we flipped from a ultrasound money deflationary asset to an inflationary asset. So anyone who knows sort of the proof of stake merges and the EIP 1559, basically the story was for every transaction that Ethereum does, there would be some sort of supply burn per transaction. So when we did this upgrade in September of 2022, we had about 120 million Ethereum in circulation and 120 million 500,000 in circulation. And then from that point to April 2024, we burned about 400,000 Ethereum of the supply. So proof of stake miners earn Ethereum issuance rate, which is their yield. It's about 5%. But if the transactions are high enough, not only does that transaction burn eat up all the inflation from the proof of stake miner rewards, but it actually goes beyond and reduces the supply. So that's how we shrunk the supply of ETH by 400,000. But since April of this year, what we've seen is that all the developers in DeFi and other protocols are building their app chains and creating all the transactions on L2s and only settling the state back to L1. So the transactions are being done off chain. So now there's no burn. And not only is there no burn, but the ETH supply has gone from deflationary to inflationary. So it took basically 18 months to reduce the supply by 400,000. And now it's only been 6 months to re-inflate the supply by that same 400,000. And so that is why people are bearish Ethereum. And I think that's really important to know because if you're doing, Bitcoin versus ETH relative vol trades, while the ETH skew is just as high, relatively speaking, as the Bitcoin skew. So, you could sell ETH skew to finance Bitcoin skew, sell ETH calls to buy Bitcoin calls type of deal. So that's kind of an interesting trade. And then Solana is eating Ethereum's lunch because Solana doesn't have that same type of proposition that is backfiring on Ethereum right now. So that's really what's interesting to me. That's a big narrative play that's going on in the markets right now.
Yeah, you kind of got there. I was looking at the same numbers, Greg, and it's hard to not draw that conclusion. Solana continues to just rally, and ETH, you're right, kind of wearing it again this week. 33.30 on our show last week, 31.14 as we came in to start the show. This week puts it down a little over 200, about 216 handles on the week. So again, everything else is just catching a bit. I just read off the numbers to you listeners in terms of overall market cap. In fact, let's see really quickly. Yeah, ETH last week was about exactly 401 billion worth of market cap. This week, 376, around 377. So yeah, not exactly boom times. I don't know, Greg, you were here on this show a long time ago talking about the impending flippening. Are you not on the flippening bandwagon? Or maybe is Solana the one going to do the flippening, sir?
Yes, Solana could flip in Ethereum. There's, Solana is a third of the market cap, so there's a lot of room to run for Ethereum. I think there's the short-term and the long-term play for Ethereum. In the long term, well, even though it's true that everyone's building on L2s, everyone is building on the EVM, Ethereum Virtual Machine, which means everyone is learning Solidity, building compilers for Ethereum smart contract execution. So in terms of actual building and use case, well, it still lives on Ethereum. So that's long-term bullish Ethereum. Short-term bearish because, again, we flipped from a deflationary token issuance to an inflationary one, which changes the dynamics. So the market is repricing that. And I think, one of the things that's kind of interesting is if we look at Ethereum trading opportunities, just like BitO and BitX, there's Ethereum ETH, which is the ETH BitO, and then there's Ethereum ETHU, which is the 2x BITO equivalent for Ethereum. So that's very interesting. For example, right now, if I look at essentially the 2x futures ETF, vol out to March is about 159. Right now, this asset trades $7.90, and the 22 call, for example, is trading 180. So if someone wants to do structures around, upside volatility in ETH to finance some sort of Bitcoin play, but that's a very interesting asset. Remember, it's going to have that contango decay. It's going to have the 2x decay. A lot of those things that work in our favor if we're call sellers. So that's kind of an interesting product to keep in mind. Another thing that I would look at if I was trading these types of strategies is you want to look at the open interest in Bitcoin CME futures versus Ethereum CME futures. So a little while ago at the beginning of the show, we were talking about the massive inflows into the Bitcoin ETFs. Well, Ethereum ETFs have had nowhere near the same sort of adoption and enthusiasm. And if we look at the CME open interest in the future space, Bitcoin's about $12 trillion of notional futures exposure, which is the largest venue worldwide. Now it's bigger than Binance, it's bigger than Kraken, Huobi, and BitMEX. Like the number one place for Delta One Bitcoin derivatives is CME. But if I look at the ETH version, well, ETH has about $1.3 billion of open interest, so a tenth, and it's like the fourth biggest venue. Binance is 4 times as big in terms of open interest for Ethereum products. So that tells us that the institutional community who would trade a CME product is not trading Ethereum. So this is something I would monitor for the enthusiasm into Ethereum, which is completely lackluster right now, and it supports the narrative of the relative vol trade.
Yeah, ETH can't get out of its own way these days. It's interesting. And I was joking about the Solana flipping, but you're right. It could easily flip ETH. I don't think that's too far in the offing if they continue at these same relative trajectories. And then who knows? Maybe Solana is the one to vie for the crown against Bitcoin. We shall see. We shall see, Mr. Greg. Are you out there, listeners? Are you on the Solana bandwagon? Hopefully you have been over the last year or so. It's been quite the run, even over the last few months. Last month, it's been a pretty good run. Before we get to more Solana talk, though, listen, we might have to start at this point, Greg. We might have to start getting back into the options on Solana, sir. We kicked them to the curb on the show here. We might have to start bringing them back into the conversation. But let's kick things off in ETH as we are wont to do, listeners. Let's look at some of the vol and skew numbers here. Last week on the show, the weekly vol in ETH 81 coming in quite a bit. 70.35 as we kicked off the show, so coming in over 10 points out there. 30-day vol kind of treading water, 64 on the show last week, 63 3/4, and the longer-term vol, the hodlers, they look like they're kind of treading water as well, 62.8 on the show last week, 63 this week. Greg, you just broke down a lot that's catching your eye in terms of OI and term structure out there in ETH. Anything catching your eye from a straight vol perspective right now, sir?
Yeah, I think the one that's really interesting right now is MSTR. I think a pretty liquid product. Right now, Michael Saylor is raising equity to buy more Bitcoin, which basically means that he's selling at market stocks of MSTR and using the funds to buy Bitcoin. So essentially the vol on MSTR is about 125%. Bitcoin's about 62%, so a 2x vol. Now, obviously, the beta justifies that, but there's kind of interesting things to do. So if I look at MSTR long-term implied vol, right now we're at like a 4-year high. And so Bitcoin is kind of mid-range in terms of the past 4 years. So, sell the derivative and buy the underlying asset type of trade. It's like sell gold miners to buy the gold physical. That's kind of how I view it. MSTR is the gold miner for Bitcoin. It's not a miner, but it's kind of that type of derivative exposure, and use that sort of vol premium to buy the underlying Bitcoin asset itself, since those are highly correlated instruments. I think there's interesting stuff to do there. Obviously don't do anything that's open-ended in my mind, or like I'm not looking at open-ended things, but I think like broken wing flies and stuff like that where you collect a credit, very interesting stuff. So that's kind of what's catching my eye in terms of the relative vol space.
You know what, Greg, I am intrigued So I'm going to put it out. We have a few minutes left in the show. I'm going to put it out to our listeners, a little quick flash poll, Mr. Greg. Maybe we'll come back to it next year. We have a little bit more time, or in the coming weeks. But just very simply, which digital asset do you think has more upside over the coming year? Just ETH versus Solana, Greg. We'll pit them against each other, and we'll see what our listeners have to say before the end of the show. Which one do you think they're going to pick, Greg?
I think they're going to pick Solana.
Yeah, I think so too. But we shall see. We shall see, Mr. Greg. We're not done with ETH quite yet. Let's go out to the skew front, listeners. Skew on ETH, as you might imagine, given the fact that it's kind of given up the ghost over the past week. Coming in, the weekly skew, 3.4 to the upside on the show last week, 1.6 this week, so cut more than in half. Going out to the monthly skew, same deal, 3.7 points to the upside last week, so nearly 4 points worth of upside bullish goodness last week. This week, cut more than in half, down to about 1.9 out there as well. And then the 180-day skew, 3 even on the show last week, 4.3 this week. Mr. Greg, the skew numbers kind of backing it up. Folks are not exactly feeling, let's just say, overwhelming upside joy in ETH right now, sir.
Yep. I think that's right on point.
Well, we talked about Solana earlier. Let's get into the hard numbers here, listeners. Another good week for Solana on the show last week, 219.5. Coming into the start of the show this week, 234.80, up another 15.3 handles on the week. Yeah, Greg, I was joking earlier because we used to feature Solana heavily on the show. That options market was starting to kick into high gear. Then we all know what happened with FTX. We all know what happened with Solana as a result. Kind of circled the bowl for a while. Got down into the single digits, but not for too long, but it hung out there for a bit. And the options market kind of cratered. Fast forward a few years now, the price fast forwarding to the upside quite a bit. Might be time to revisit that. Mr. Greg, what do you think? You think it's time for us to reincorporate Solana into the show, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting interested. It's definitely interesting from a spot price perspective. I think the options are still like pretty illiquid. So number one venue remains Deribit for Solana options. It's still kind of a wide market. So it's from a vol perspective, it's a little bit less interesting. But from a underlying asset perspective, I mean, it's an asset worth talking about for sure.
Certainly the argument for options makes more sense at a 234 than it did at a 12 or a 15 or a 20, Mr. Greg. So that certainly makes it a little more interesting. You're right. The option's still not quite there, but we'll keep an eye on them, listeners. If you folks want us to go deep into all things Solana from an options perspective, we can certainly make that happen. Let's see. Right now, Greg, the early voting, it just went live. 100% of the audience is going for Solana. I have a feeling that'll change once it's been live for more than a minute. But still, a lot of Solana love out there, listeners. Hard to argue. The numbers are backing it up. XRP. Man, XRP. Look at this. XRP. When's the last time we saw a $1 level in XRP, listeners? It's been quite some time. So maybe this is the sign, Greg, that this is the wildest period in crypto history, because XRP can catch a bid and sustain it. 59 cents a week ago, $1.08 today, up nearly 50 cents on the week. I don't know, Greg, maybe you don't need any more data points. This is it. XRP can hold $1. This is the wildest time in crypto. What do you think?
XRP rallying is like a top signal. It's like that famous story where in the Roaring 20s where the stock investor talks to his cab driver and his cab driver is asking him which stocks he's to buy, and that's how he knew it was the top. Well, XRP rallying is the same type of phenomenon. I'm half kidding because I don't think we're at a top, but I think XRP is just a trash coin, and the fact that it's rallying isn't something that I pay attention to or think that is like sustainable.
So XRP for you is the equivalent of the cabbie stock pick. That's what it is, or the barbershop stock pick. Have you heard about this hot stock you as you're getting your hair cut? Yes. There we go. So listeners, I don't know. Send your hate mail, Greg at Amberdata, for all you XRP fans out there. I'm just surprised it can hold $1. We'll see if it can do that. That color me surprised at that, listeners. Doge continues to maintain its upside, 32.5 cents on the show last week, almost 36.5 cents this week, up about 4 cents. So doesn't sound like a blinding amount of upside, but then again, when you're starting from a pretty low baseline, 4 cents coming on top of 32 cents. Not the end of the world. Litecoin 78 and a quarter last week, 86.85 this week, up a little over 8.5 points. Cardano 59.4 cents last week, 72.9 cents this week, up 13, almost 13.5 cents. And Polkadot 521 last week, 576, up a little over half a buck. And everyone's favorite, maybe you're a little less favorite this week, Shiba Inu. Everything else is rising, listeners, with the exception of ETH, apparently. And add Shiba to that list. A million zeros, 2769 on the show last week, 2439 this week. So coming in ever so slightly out there. Mr. Greg, you already talked about your beloved product for the degenerates, the MSTU. Anything else catching your eye in the altcoin universe you want to share with the folks?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I still think Dogecoin is very interesting. I just wouldn't be like, now that we have XRP breaking the buck, I could just see, Dogecoin at $1 was a sensible, relative target, so to speak. I mean, obviously, not financial advice, but I just think could Elon Musk hint at Dogecoin integration on X anymore? I don't think so. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I don't think that the probability is zero either. So I think there's some legs behind that type of meme coin, because that is a meme in terms of altcoins.
All right, listeners, we'll get out of here with a little bit of your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, last week while we were on the show with Mr. Greg, we asked you quite simply, was this past week the wildest week in crypto history? I suppose if we want to extend it another week, we can make it the past 2 weeks. But last week we asked you that. And Greg, a resounding 66.7% of the audience, exactly 2/3, coming in as yes, 1/3 obviously saying no. A bunch of people chiming in. Russell on value, he didn't agree. He said, how short is your memory? And then other folks like Shaheen Rahman said it will be this week. He thought this week was going to be the hot week. So Russell on value aside, Mr. Greg, 2/3 of the audience said not this past week, but the week before was the wildest week in crypto history. What do you think, sir?
Well, it was definitely up there. It was definitely top 5. I think if you've been around since multiple years, you've seen some craziness in crypto. Again, this is why crypto is so interesting. This is when you're a vol player, if you're buying vol, these things can move a lot. And last week was a big moving week. This week's been a big moving week. And I think the craziest week has yet to come. I think we're going to see really interesting stuff, especially if governments start getting involved and start buying Bitcoin. There's this narrative that came out a few months ago about a seller liquidity crisis, where at some point through the order book, is there enough sellers around? So we could see some crazy things happen. So just keep that in mind.
Uh-oh. Seller liquidity crisis. Too many people hodling, Mr. Greg out there. Looking at these numbers right now, our audience now can't make up their mind, Mr. Greg. They are exactly 50-50 on ETH versus Solana. So, just ticked. Now 57.1% for Solana, Greg. 42.9% for ETH. So our audience having a hard time making up their mind, Mr. Greg. ETH versus Solana. This will be live for the next hour. It's just a flash poll, listeners. So it's why you want to be listening live, or of course why you want to be following us at Options over there on Twitter to make your voice heard. All right, that is going to do it for us on the Crypto Rundown. Man, yet another wild week out there. ETH, Solana, XRP, Bitcoin, all sorts of madness on the show. MSTU for you degenerates out there. All sorts of wild stuff making it on the show this week. And before we go, Mr. Greg, if folks want to check out what you and the team have cooking over there in the land of Amberdata, where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, really exciting news. We're going to make the GUI application free for our users. So if you want to sign up, you just need an email and you get full access. So you can check out all the charts, see where vol's trading on all these products. You go to pro.amberdata.io. And if you want to check out our weekly newsletter and sort of get a rundown of my thoughts on the market and what's going on there, you can go to amberdataderivative.substack.com, and follow us on Twitter at GenesisFall, which is my old company before merging with Amberdata. And yeah, hope you find that useful.
Wow, that GUI's going free for everybody. Wow, that's fantastic. So listeners, I always say on the show, we kind of just scratch the surface of all the data they have cooking over there. It's only roughly 1 hour show, listeners. It's not 6 hours long. So we have to kind of pick and choose. But now you don't have to, listeners. You head on over there and kick the tires and light the fires for yourself on the GUI completely free. That's a great thing, Mr. Greg. More data in the world of crypto can only help. It is still the Wild West. Look at these assets we're talking about, Greg. Whipsawing all over the place. People need to arm themselves with more data. So head on over there, listeners. Amberdata.io, the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. That's going to do it for us on the network today. Back, though, with our usual array of content throughout the week. You don't want to miss it, listeners. Futures Rundown on Wednesday. Of course, Options Bootcamp on Wednesday. The Option Block this week in Futures Options on Thursday. Vol Views and Options Oddities on Friday. Pro Q&As, all sorts of fun. I will be heading down. The Futures Industry Association Expo is in town this week, so I will be heading down there this week, see if I can suss out some folks that will be interesting to talk about all the fun stuff we talk about on this network here. So look forward to some fun coming out of that this week as well. And then we're back again next Monday, another episode of the Crypto Rundown. Stay safe out there, everybody.
The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.